Okay, let's try to pass the right value to the view matrix. So here we are in render all shapes. And here's where we're setting up the view matrix. And previously we just had an identity. So when we declare this matrix, it's an identity. And we're going to use GeoUniform to pass it. So here's our view matrix element we're passing into view matrix. It's getting used in our vertex shader. And here we've set lookat. So we're going to put ourselves in the 0, 0 on -1 on Z, looking at the origin, and up has got a y equals 1. And we get some picture that looks like this. And when we try to move our camera around, there's something crazy happening. And all this edges where we're being cut off along here, this is because of our near and far clipping planes are set kind of funny. So if we try to move around and move our position, so if we try to back up, let's say we try to back up to -10, we're just going to get a black screen because we have our near and far, we got clipped out entirely. So let me set this thing back. And in order to make our life easier, I'm going to go try to get the perspective matrix set up also so that we can figure out what's going on. So here I've got a perspective matrix, and I'm going to set this to be 90 degrees wide, and this is the aspect, so the width by height, that's 1. And I'm going to say my near plane is 0.1, so it's pretty close, and my far plane is 100, so that we get a pretty wide perspective. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now we got ourselves in some crazy position. Where the heck are we? So, of course, we moved around because the perspective is not the same as orthographic. So we need to now go change our setLookAt to match our new perspective viewing. Since perspective, you're normally looking, since lookat, you're normally looking down the negative z-axis, I'm gonna change this to be saying that we're at position 1 and we're looking at -100 at our eye point. So that's going to flip us around. We're now looking at this thing in some other kind of way of what's going on. However, we can now try to move around our position. So we want to back up from here. So there's a couple of things we can do to back up. We could try to set our angle of view wider, which we're doing in perspective, and that in some sense backs us up, but that's kind of funny. It behaves kind of weird because we've now got a very wide angle. So I'm going to actually set a narrower angle here, which has got us way zoomed in, and then I'm going to back up using my camera controls to back me up into a new position. So I'm going to say, like, let's suppose I was 3 units away. Okay, now we have something that makes more sense. Right? We can still rotate our object. We're on the back side relative to where we were previously because we've moved around, but we're at this position. We're looking here. So now what's it going to mean if we change our lookat point, right? Because we're going to later want to have key commands to do this. So if I want to go forward, I don't want to be at 3. I want to be at 2. So let's see if that does the right thing. Okay, it looks like I moved forward. 3, I'm moving backwards, right? If I want to move back 4, if I go to 4, I've moved back even further. And if I move on X, try to predict what's going to happen here. If I move on X, we've moved over in our X position of where we are relative to our world looking at things. Now remember, my lookat point is not the object. My lookat point is way in the distance at -100 currently. And similarly, we can say what would happen if we changed our degrees. So let's go ahead and let me make this a little bigger so we can see what's going on. Okay, so if I change my degrees to be 30, this is going to narrow in the field of view. It's essentially the same as cropping out just the center of this. So let's go ahead and see that. Okay, that in fact does what we would expect it to do. Let me move back out a little bit here. So this width times height, this is the aspect ratio. So let's just go ahead and put a different number in here. Oh, look at that. We changed the aspect ratio of the image. So here's a different aspect ratio. So one of the great things about just typing in the debugger and saving, because we're running an animation loop, why is this working? And it wouldn't have necessarily worked if we didn't have the animation loop. Because remember, we keep rendering over and over and over. That's how we're getting our animation working. So as soon as I live update this thing is 30 frames a second coming and rerunning this routine. So even I don't have my overrides set up right now, so I'm not reloading the page. I'm just changing the code and it's just rerunning it. So what if we start to mess with our near and our far planes? So let's do that a little bit. So here's our near plane. I've got it set at 0.1. Let's push it out to 1. Oh, I still see my whole picture. 2. Still see my picture. 3. Oh, I start to cut things off. I cut away things when I got to 3. Well, why? Because I'm 3 away from my objects, which are mostly kind of near the origin. So the near plane actually did something here. So we can adjust all these parameters live and see what's going on. And that's going to turn out to be quite useful when it's time to set up our keystrokes to move around in the right way. Now there's another thing that we can try to do that can be useful to you. So this command right here is setting up a matrix. So we can just go type that thing in the console. Let me do this a little bit different. Well, we're not defining the right thing, but we can do a new matrix for, and then do setLookAt. And then if we want to, we can go look at the elements and actually see what got stuck into this matrix and what's going on. So if you're having a hard time getting your objects set up and getting things in the right place, you can actually just go run code in your console to call the setLookAt command, and for that matter, to call the setPerspective command. So we could call this command and see what matrix is it generating. I'm going to have to put a new matrix 4 in the front of this to be able to do it. And then this is going to have some matrix which is getting created. Now this is some kind of crazy matrix that I don't even know what all these elements are and what is it doing, because we normally just call setPerspective. setLookAt is more useful, that we can figure out. However, if you wanted to change to setOrtho, there should be some parameters that can get you to an identity matrix. Same with lookat. We can easily get a setLookAt matrix, which has an identity, which is just producing the identity matrix. So let's get setLookAt. If we're on the positive axis, looking down the negative z axis, this should in fact be producing an identity matrix. So if we look in here, got a 1 in the top right, and then I got 1s on my diagonal, and then why do I have this -3 in here? That because I'm backing up along z from the origin, right? That's the lookat. We wanted the lookat that produced the identity matrix. Then we would set ourselves on the origin, looking down the -z. And now this one should be the identity matrix. Right, because that's the definition of lookat. That's how lookat is defined. So we can go check these things if we want to do that. So the last thing that we have to do is just set up some variables that we're going to control that say where our camera is in the world. So I'm going to leave our perspective, so I'm never going to mess with perspective. If you wanted to, you'd make some variables for that and maybe have a slider for what your field of view is or something. So I'm just going to keep track of my I and my at. In fact, maybe I don't even... Well, we may keep up, because we may be using up. We may want to look up and down, be able to control this in some kind of way. So, and then I'm just passing those into lookat instead of this commented out version where I had it hard-coded. Now you have a fancy vector class now. So in assignment 0, you've made a vector class. I don't have it because I didn't do that one. So instead of doing this, I can pass in my vectors and use those, and I can set these up to be actually my vector class instead of just JavaScript arrays.